Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the Cosmic Connection. This is where we explore the beauty and the order of the cosmos and your connection with it all. I'm here with Master Astrologer Rick Levine. And for those of you who don't know me, my name's Amanda Walsh. I'm the founder of Astrology Hub. And today we are going to be covering a very, very important topic that I've actually been wanting to cover for a while. So I'm really grateful that we have the time and space to do it now. And that is, why was astrology ever illegal? And how is that changing? So lots to explore there. Before we do, Rick, let's talk about level 2. Astrology Foundations level 2 starts tomorrow. Tomorrow. If you're watching this recording and you're not catching us live, it's not too late to join. So we're not actually closing the doors for this class, but we are releasing the first module tomorrow. So if you're a little bit late in catching this recording, you can still join us. You'll get access to module 1 or wherever you join us in the stream, which is lasting 5 weeks. So the whole course lasts 5 weeks, and there's 5 different modules. You get each module released at the beginning. Well, actually, you get it released on Fridays, and then we're having our live Q&A session in this time slot on Thursdays every week of that 5-week period. And a few things that you may not know about the way that the content is delivered for you. You will receive your weekly video lesson. It's also in audio format. We provide you also with the transcripts and the slides, and you also get study guides. So when there's content that would be really helpful to have, like a PDF document, you'll have study guides as well. Those come in beautifully formatted versions that you probably wouldn't want to print. And then we turn those into other versions that are black and white that you could print, put in a folder, have for a long time. And Rick, I'm working on something that had me revisiting some level 1 content. And it was almost like listening to the class again for the first time. It's incredible how much amazing content that you provide. And the great thing about these courses is that you will have access to them for as long as Astrology Hub is in existence. So you can just continue to go back and revisit and revisit and revisit. And actually, someone was in my house who had taken level 1. She also thought it was a totally new class because she was hearing new things. So you'll have level 2 as long as you need it. If you didn't take level 1, you can get 10% off of level 1 when you join level 2. It is recommended, but not required. So if you feel like you have a strong foundation and you just want to jump in the stream at level 2, you can do that now as well. Rick, okay, astrologyhub.com/foundations2.
Wait a minute. I don't know if you can see all that stack of books over there.
Yes.
But that's the leftovers of me gathering the right materials, reference resources, reference reading lists for people and so on. And so I've been deep into it. And the half-hour to 45-minute classes, kind of like level 1, are running 45 minutes to an hour. There's just so much material. And I thought I could either leave material out and make it shorter or put it all in. And so I'm excited. Yeah. It's going to be a lot of fun.
So a couple other things about the class, if you'd like to join us, every week you're going to receive your next module that's broken down into 4 lessons. So those lessons are about 45 minutes to an hour, as Rick is saying. So if you're thinking about time and do I have enough time, it's going to be about, close, like around 3 to 4 hours a week of content. And then you'll have the Q&A each week. Of course, you don't have to finish everything in the 5 weeks. So if you want to just get started with it, join the live Q&As when you can, which are also, of course, recorded. You can do that. So again, if you want to join us, astrologyhub.com/foundations, the number 2, hop in now. You'll be ready for tomorrow's beginning of module 1. Okay, so there is something that Rick said, it was about 2 months ago, that stung me. Like when people say certain things and you've never thought of it that way before. And it was like, oh, wow, I have never thought of this that way before. And we were talking about censorship. And what he said is that, Amanda, astrology has historically, traditionally, not fallen in the acceptable category when it comes to this issue of censorship. Like, astrology has been censored for thousands of years, really, at this point. And I knew that there was a period of time a long period of time that was illegal. I knew that it was recent that it became legal. But this around censorship as well, it was like, wow, it's so true. This discussion that we have the freedom to have today, there are people that fought for this. There are people that Rick has already corrected me, are still fighting for this. And I think that so many of us really take it for granted just because we don't know. We weren't a part of it. We didn't live through it. So I wanted Rick to address this with us all today.
Before you ask whatever question you're going to ask, I just need to correct you because it's not astrology now is legal. There are places where astrology is illegal. It's an ongoing battle. And although we can talk about it here on the internet safely, relatively, we'll get to that in a little bit too. But the fact of the matter is that astrology is not blanket legal, because every state and every area, every city, has what are called blue laws. Do you know what a blue law is?
No.
A blue law is a law that is on the books that's left over from something in the past that doesn't really apply now, or it doesn't apply in the same way. In the state of Pennsylvania, it's illegal to sing in the bathtub. No, I mean, this is a fact. Now, it's okay to belt your heart out if you're sitting next to the bathtub after you're done with your bath, but Pennsylvania 55 code 3800.6, and in fact, it's illegal to have a child's bathroom within 200 feet it's illegal to have a child's bedroom within 200 feet of a bathtub. Bathtubs are a relatively recent thing. And at one point in time, they were considered to be as dangerous in your home, as, maybe a microwave oven was for some people. Mm-hmm. The point is, it's still illegal in Pennsylvania, technically, to be a fortune teller. And astrology is always involved in some sort of flare-ups of this question. We'll come back to it in a little more detail, but the point is, astrology is not legal. Astrology has gained ground, but it still is being censored in many ways, and it's still a bit of a social outcast. I'll give you a quick. Did you want to ask the question? I've just launched because it's such an amazing topic.
Why don't you launch, and then I'll hold my questions, because I know it was about 1986 where something very specific happened to make it more legal. But why don't you launch, and then we'll go.
Oh, there have been ongoing cases. So, there were major cases in Los Angeles. There have been major court cases in New York City, but there are ongoing cases all the time because astrologers are confronted with being grouped with people that rip people off, that sell hexes and spells, that use astrology to bilk people for money. AFAN, which is the Association for Astrological Networking, AFAN, which was started back in the early 80s. And actually, my now deceased astrology buddy and partner in crime, Jeff Jower, was one of the founders of AFAN. But AFAN, which is around, you can go to afan.org and you can, they have a legal, what they call a legal chair. And this is an ongoing person who's always holds the legal chair at AFAN. And they have on their site a list of their legal record because they have attorneys and backup laws and cases. Um, I mean, just as an example, in 1993, fortune telling was legalized in Connecticut, and in California. I mean, AFAN was involved in an appellate and a Supreme Court case in Azusa. This might be the early 80s one. I don't recall the date on this. But there was a case, an astrologer was actually arrested and tried for fortune telling, and people who were using or doing astrology had to buy a license that actually was the same license that a adult sex worker had to get. That was a police check and a exorbitant bond fee and so on. Even Burbank, California had a licensing ordinance that was a $200 fee to say you were an astrologer. But this particular case was dismissed with AFAN's, legal team involved. But I mean, you can go state by state. But one of the peculiar states has been Pennsylvania, where astrology or fortune telling has been illegal. But going back in history, not too far, is one of the most fascinating court cases that actually became a precedent for so much else, and that had to do with an astrologer named Evangeline Adams, and she was actually a direct descendant of President Adams, and Evangeline Adams was tried in New York City because of her. She was arrested on an anti-fortune telling statute. I'm thinking this was like 1914. I'm pretty sure it was like 1914. And I mean, she had offices in Carnegie Hall, and her client list included actors, opera stars, politicians, kings. I mean, it was just an amazing thing. And she predicted a fire in one of the New York City hotels. I can't remember offhand what it was, but because it made all the front pages of the New York City newspapers, she was arrested.
Did she use astrology to predict that?
She was an astrologer. That was her life job.
Okay.
Yes. And the astrology that she did then is different than the astrology that we do now. It was much more predictive oriented. But she was arrested in New York, which made it a crime to pretend, quote, to pretend to tell fortunes. And those who violated that were judged to be disorderly persons and should be therefore punished. Now, Adams, with her support of her clients, and one of them is actually, several of her clients were deposed as part of this trial. It was a high publicity trial because she was she was a big deal at that time. And at her trial, she contended that she used scientific methods, that the measurements of astronomy and using of logarithms and rigors of mathematics were not fortune telling. She said that she never predicted a specific future event, nor did she promote reliance on her predictions. I mean, she went through this whole thing. She didn't claim to have special gifts. But the fact of the matter is that several of her clients were deposed in her defense. One of them was this guy named J.P. Morgan. And in J.P. Morgan's deposition, he said, and this is a quote you hear people say, but but people don't know who said it. And it was, I mean, this is documented. It was J.P. Morgan in a court deposition. And what he said was quote, millionaires use their brains. Billionaires use their astrologers. So that quote is one that you see as an astrologer. I see it pop.
I've wondered, is it actually true? Like, did it like, how do we know he said that? But now you're
it's there's a record in the court deposition.
Wow.
And the way that was actually that case was actually adjudicated was that after, I don't know how long it went on, it was frustrating. Let me just see. I'm reading this right now. Is that there was someone in this case where quote, where the substantive merits of astrology were completely analyzed by a duly constituted judicial authority. Text from the Encyclopedia Britannica referred to this as, quote, the leading authority in the world that was being quoted. And the person that was being quoted said, the belief in a connection between the heavenly bodies and the life of man has played an important part in human history. Men of intellectual eminence have convinced themselves that astrology has foundation in truth. One scientist insisted, indeed, it was a mistake to confuse astrology with fortune telling, and maintained it was a physical science just as much as geology, which depended on ascertained facts and grossly misrepresented by being connected with magic. Now, what happened was, and the thing that turned the case around, was the judge asked Evangeline Adams to demonstrate her art by interpreting a mystery chart from birth data that he supplied. And apparently, she just did a crazy knockdown job on it. And it turned out to be the judge's son. And he said that her reading gave him valuable and useful insight into his son's character and behavior. And I'm reading now this from the news clipping. Judge John Freschi said in ruling from the bench, quote, the defendant raises astrology to the dignity of an exact science. Now, that was in 1914. But that didn't change the laws in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Massachusetts, or anywhere else. It just took the law off the books in New York City.
Wow.
So the problem really goes back to, and then the Supreme Court, the California Supreme Court decision, which AFAN was all over and involved in. It's known as the Azusa, because it was in Azusa, California. It's known as the Azusa decision, where the California Supreme Court overturned as an unconstitutional infringement of free speech a Azusa, California ordinance that completely banned fortune telling. The court held that astrologers and fortune tellers or palmists have the same constitutionally protected right to express and charge for their opinions as other mainstream forecasters. Now,
and that was 1986. Is that true?
I don't have that date in front of me.
That's what Judith Hill told me. It was 1986. I think if we're talking about the same thing, I think that's relatively recent.
Yeah, right? It must have been right around. I was already involved in AFAN at that time, and it was right around that time. Mm-hmm. But anti-fortune telling laws go back to the 1600s, where the British Vagrancy Act was designed to curtail, quote unquote, gypsies and other wandering poor vagrants. And in colonial United States, that was ruled by, governed by British law. So the new states continued and adopted most of those as city ordinances, and largely the laws were either ethnically or racially or sometimes medically justified diseases of foreign travelers. They go back to the plagues where people from China, or rats came on boats from China. I mean, it's always, someplace else, someone else. So it was tied to other reasons. But there were definitely, anti-fraud, anti-pickpocket, in intent. But there is an association with the gypsy stereotype of taking advantage of people and then running away with their money, so to speak. But it is stereotype, and it's guilt by association, and it was found to be in violation of due process and equal justice by the California Supreme Court. And so, this was, and the court case in Azusa actually, I think one of the defendants was a family of gypsies that were members of the Romani from Romania community who founded a spiritual church, and they were doing palm readings for donations as part of their religious practice. Now that's outside of the, astrology piece, but it all came together under this Supreme Court ruling. But the thing is it goes way beyond laws. And AFAN, I don't even know how many, since the early 80s, I'm guessing that they were probably involved in 20, 30, 40 different separate court cases where an astrologer was arrested for not having the right license, or for practicing fortune telling illegally. And AFAN actually sued the city of Albany, the Bay Area near San Francisco, to overturn a city ordinance that was making. Well, that ordinance, if I remember correctly, was it was kind of what they call an arrest first law. In other words, it demanded fingerprints, mugshots, a bond, and exorbitant fees before you could put out your shingle and say that you were an astrologer. And that was in some ways as bad as it being illegal, because astrologers just couldn't afford and couldn't do it. I mean, it was basically meant to make it, impossible. But one can go to the AFAN, AFAN, the Association for Astrological Networking, and be in touch. If anyone is hassled legally, the AFAN legal group is the people that are the champion, whether you're a member of AFAN or not. That's not why they're doing it. But you see, the problem goes beyond this. And I'll tell you, when I said that, no, this isn't, astrology is not illegal, or astrology is not legal and it's all cool now.
Right.
It's like saying that, that in many states selling cannabis is legal.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
However, you can't use the American banking system. So that even though doing business is legal, most banks will not open up a business account for someone selling drugs, or in fact will not allow you to use debit cards or credit cards. I live in, I've smoked my share of marijuana, but never since it's been legal. I've smoked in years and years. But the point is that I can walk into anyone. There's 3 or 4 stores within walking distance of where I live where I can buy marijuana recreationally, just like because I want to. I cannot use my credit card and I cannot use a debit card. Now, it's legal, but you see there's another whole level of keeping it excluded. And here's where it gets interesting. And that is, many people who do astrology. I mean, I remember doing astrology when taking a credit card was, no one did that. You either paid by check in advance so that it cleared, or in cash. But all your clients were in person. No one did clients on the phone. And of course, there weren't even computers to calculate a chart. So there certainly weren't computers to enter stuff online. But the many people are now using services like Square. Square is a service where pretty much anyone can get a little Square device, an account, and open up an account and take credit cards from someone, so that now when you go to like a farmer's market, which 10 years ago you had to pay cash and some places took checks, local checks. But now when you go to most farmers markets, everyone just runs it on their cell phone, through a little swiper that's Square or Venmo or PayPal or something that's done online. Well, Square, as the largest of those services, if you say that you're an astrologer in your registration, you cannot get a Square account. Period.
Wow.
You can argue all you want, but it's not going to happen. And this is something that AFAN was involved with a few years ago. I don't know if they still are right now. I don't even know the actual current status of it. But this then gets to the whole thing of censorship. And that is, as we were talking, I jumped to, I did a quick Google. No, not a quick Google, a quick Wikipedia search on astrology. And all I did was I went to Wikipedia and I typed in astrology, and it comes up with: astrology is a pseudoscience that claims to divine information about human affairs by studying the movements and relative positions of celestial objects. That opening statement is basically saying astrology is a pseudoscience, not that it's a social science like sociology or psychology, not that it's based on any information, but it's basically a pseudoscience that claims. And it goes on from there. It does do there is a whole history piece, and it does represent that. But I know of astrologers who have been in constant ongoing communication and negotiation as a Wikipedia contributor for ever since Wikipedia was started. I'm guessing 10 years ago, 12 years ago. And they've made little, inroads here and there, but it says, the scientific community rejects astrology as having no explanatory power for describing the universe and considers it a pseudoscience. Scientific testing has been conducted and no evidence has ever been found to support any of the premises or purported effects outlined in astrological traditions, along with footnotes. There is no proposed mechanism of action, blah, 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 blah. Those who have faith in astrology have been characterized by scientists, including Bart Bach, and I'll tell you a little bit more about this shady guy if you want to know in a moment, have been characterized by Dr. Bart Bach as doing so, quote, in spite of the fact that there is no verified scientific basis for their beliefs and indeed for the strong evidence to the contrary. Now, it goes on and it gets worse and it gets worse. I have here this wonderful little book. Can you see what this book is?
Yes. The Case
for Astrology. And it says, after centuries of debate, astrology is bigger than ever. This book tells why. And in my copy of this book, I have this little thing here called Tar Baby, but you see the S in front of it?
Yeah.
Star Baby. Now, I get that Uncle Remus and those Tales of the South have a bit of dated inherent racism in them, and I'm not necessarily promoting that. But in fact, distancing myself from that. But this little booklet is basically about some of the scientists who set out to disprove work that was done by a French statistician named Michel Gauquelin. And I'm not getting off track here. I'll bring this around very quickly because Gauquelin's data, he was a Sorbonne trained statistician, And his data was one of the first inarguable, oh my God, there's something here. And that could be a whole discussion unto itself. But this group of scientists, this is roughly in the mid 80s, I think maybe 1986, I think. Somewhere around that. They started an organization called PsyCops, which is the Committee for the Scientific Investigation of Claims of the Paranormal. PsyCops, CSICOPS. And the fact is that, Tar Baby was this thing that you got stuck to. It was like made of tar, and it was meant to be like a deterrent. But it's like when you touch Tar Baby, you got stuck to it, and then more and more until you couldn't free yourself. You were stuck. And so the authors of this little document about how this group tried to disprove astrology by duplicating the Gokwalan studies, and then one of the members basically busted them because they were falsifying data because it came out true, and they couldn't have that, so they began selecting data, and that's why this is called Star Baby, because they were pretty messed up by this whole thing. Now, this story, and Bart Bach is a Harvard astronomer, PhD, tenured astronomy professor, and he led a group, I think this was in 1986 or 87, that was 186 astronomers, Nobel Prize-winning scientists to all co-sign a full-page ad in Science magazine that cautioned the public against the charlatans and fortune tellers who are in the world of astrology. And I actually think, I don't know if this book has an actual copy of the ad. I'm not seeing it.
I mean, Rick, why are they trying so hard?
Well, let's come back to that in just a minute. Yeah. Let me just tell you here so the fact of the matter is that when they couldn't disprove it, they basically made shit up, which is kind of a common scenario, I think, without taking that any further. It was like, but they got caught. But they got caught. It didn't stop them. And in fact, this group, PsyCops, has been in operation. Their ringleader actually was a man named James Randi, a magician, who basically said that he offered, I think it was $1 million prize. I don't remember the exact 20. I don't remember. He offered a prize for anyone who could demonstrate that psychic and or astrology stuff was real. And in every case, he was a magician and he knew it was all magic. So he just, for him, it was just a show. But your question was a really good question. And it gets back to the problem that astrology has always had, but it got worse around the beginning of the 17th century. That was the shift of what we now call the beginning of the Age of Enlightenment. And we're looking at Johannes Kepler and Descartes and Isaac Newton into the 18th century. And what happened basically was that even going back prior to that, because of the position of the church, you could not practice astrology without being potentially burned at the stake. It wasn't so much you were taken up in a court of law. You were basically tested to see if you were a witch. And, you were bound up and thrown in water. And if you sunk and died, that meant you were a witch. Or, you were put on a rack until you confessed. Mm. Or, as in the case of the last person who was burned alive in Rome, and the spot is marked right now. You can go there. And that would be Giordano Bruno. And Giordano Bruno was burned at the stake for basically saying that that the sun is a star, and that there are lots of stars, and that therefore there's lots of planets going around lots of stars. And how could Jesus have been on all of them at once? And so they just burned him, but in more modern times, people who have practiced astrology have been ridiculed, not just excommunicated by the church. Although I should mention that Martin Luther, not Martin Luther King, but Martin Luther, who began the Protestant Reformation, or as I've said before, the Protestant Reformation, which occurred on a Saturn-Pluto conjunction. Martin Luther's right-hand man was a brilliant and published academic astrologer. But then again, we forget that most of the techniques that we modern astrologers use are named after monks, like Regiomontanus, Placidus, Campanus, Marinus. All these different house cusp systems are basically named after monks, and it was the monks who kept astrology alive through the Christian world. But, in the words of Thomas Aquinas, it's not in his words, but conceptually, you can't serve two masters. Are you going to go to the priest for redemption, or are you going to go to the edge of town and listen to the astrologer? And so the sidelining and censorship and making it illegal. I mean, it is illegal. If you're excommunicated, you might as well have been tried in a court of law. And so making it illegal was a way of suppressing it and controlling it and keeping the power in the church. And we might make a side note that the church has one of the largest, has the largest singular historic library of astrological texts in the world. Now, I'm not saying they have every new and modern book, but one of astrologers' leading figures, a man named Rob Hand, who I always refer to as the academic dean of astrology on planet Earth. Rob went back to college as I think he was probably nearly 60 or right around there, to get a PhD so he could teach astrology at a college level. And he went to a college that his degree that he got, his PhD, is in ancient history. And in Rob's words, he went to study and to get his PhD from Catholic University. Because if you're going to get a PhD in ancient history, Rob quipped one day, you might as well get the degree from people who are still living in it, in ancient history. Now, he was welcomed there. The priests and the professors there recognized that he was an academic, and they said, we need people like you doing the work. Well, Rob's doctoral thesis, and I don't know the exact wording of his final thesis, but that his area of specialty and what he was working on was a thesis on the church's use of astrology in medieval warfare. Until around the time of Cosimo Medici, which I talk about in the Level 2 Foundations course on experiential astrology, it's lesson 4 of module 1. Marsilio Ficino was an ordained priest, and he was the court astrologer to 3 generations of Medicis, arguably the wealthiest family on the planet, absolutely the wealthiest family in Europe, a family so wealthy it financially bailed out Rome, it bailed out the church. But the church had this ongoing battle with not just with Marsilio Ficino, who was a priest, but with Florence, because Florence was becoming an intellectual center, and all the bishops were going to Florence to study with Marsilio Ficino, and they were learning things that was outside the realm of the absolute truth of the Bible. And it was actually Ficino's writings and his translations of Plato and the Corpus Hermetica, the Hermetic tradition. Those translations actually are what fueled 100 years later the Protestant Reformation. Rome lost its power. But when we go a little bit further, we then end up with someone like Johannes Kepler, whose day job was an astrologer. That's what he did for a living. His title was Mathematicus. That was his job title. And he was the Mathematicus for Emperor Rudolph, who was Emperor Rudolph was not the Pope, who was basically the kingpin of the Roman Empire. Emperor Rudolph was the kingpin of the Holy Roman Empire, which was the Protestant breakaway, if you will. And Kepler was his Mathematicus. What that meant was that Kepler's job was keeping time. His job was making calendars and making almanacs and advising Emperor Rudolph when and when not to go to war and who to marry and who not to marry. And Kepler hated that part of his job, just like I, who wrote 18, 17 years of daily horoscopes. I shouldn't say I hated it, but my feeling about that was the same as Kepler's. When modern astronomers say Kepler was the father of modern astronomy, but he, like many stupid people of his era, believed in the ancient superstition of astrology, but he didn't really believe in it. And they go to his writings to prove that he didn't believe in it. But the fact of the matter is that Kepler hated the idea that astrology was being used to determine whether to go to war or not, and when an emperor or king or duke would get laid or not. And he hated it. So he wrote against that, but he wasn't writing. And in fact, have you ever heard the term, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater?
Yes.
That comes from Kepler's book, Tertium Inter Venus, which is Latin for kind of like the third person in between. Roughly translated, the third man in the middle. And he's basically considering himself the third man in the middle, in between what's called the blasphemies of the superstitions of old astrology and the moderners who want to get rid of it. And his caution to them was, when looking at astrology, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. That's where that saying comes from.
Wow.
Now, what happens, though, is that Kepler, who is even today considered to be the father of modern astronomy, is considered to be an astronomer who had a quirk. And that was that he did astrology, but he only did it for money, like astrologers today, because he got paid by the emperor to do it, but he didn't believe in it. And of course, nothing could be further from the truth. And in fact, what we have as Kepler's 3 laws of planetary motion that Newton then took and turned into the laws of acceleration, motion, and gravity, that the reason why Kepler discovered those laws was a lifetime of pursuit of trying to get more accurate horoscopes. All right. So what happens, though, is that in this shift from astrology and astronomy being the same thing, there was no difference. You know, there was that's why the church was big on astrology, was because they had observatories, the old ancient, the Magi, the Zoroastrian astrologers or astronomer priests. Astronomy and astrology was all tied together. But come the Age of Enlightenment, we now have laws of mathematics that show here's how the planets move. We have laws of gravity. We have Descartes, who says, give me enough mathematical equations and I can know everything there is to know about the universe. This is the beginning of the Age of Enlightenment. And at that point in time, astrology was tossed out of any remaining university that it might have been in. And so astrology has become not just censored, but any academic who uses the word astrology. We've talked about Thomas More before. Anyone who this kind of like Thomas More, the author of Soulmates and Care of the Soul and all of those books, was chastised because in one of his books he referenced astrology, and his publisher said, "You need to take this out." And to his credit, he said, "I'm sorry, I can't. It's the purpose. It's the main purpose of the book." And but even today in modern times, although it's changing, and now you see many astrologers with higher level degrees from colleges. I was intimately involved. I was one of the co-founders of Kepler College here in Seattle. In fact, I named it for exactly the reason that I just told you that story. I offered that as a name and everyone jumped on it. But we're finding astrology being reaccepted in some levels. I have another associate who got his doctorate in statistics, basically using advanced statistical methods in astrology. He's an astrologer, but that's what his doctoral thesis is on. And he is a university professor today. You see more astronomers open. And so there's a breaking down, just like these old blue laws are going, but it ain't done because largely, here's the thing. As far as I know, astrology's distinction as the intellectual and spiritual bad boy on the block is that it's pretty much the only thing that I know of that modern science and the Catholic Church agree on. And what they agree is that astrology is a wart, on the body of mankind or humankind, and it needs to be exorcised or exorcised, or it needs to be cut out either surgically or with incantations, because it's a blight and it's the work of Satan. And here we would, of course, have to say Satan is Saturn, and Saturn has gotten a historical bad rap because of the church's view of Satan. And that's another whole rabbit hole we're not going down. So the whole issue of legality is not just a matter of it used to be illegal and now it's legal. We have a long way to go because of the two main judgments against astrology. And they both judge astrology negatively, but for slightly different reasons. And they're very specific reasons. The church, which is different than the teachings of Jesus, as was very, very analytically portrayed in the work of Søren Kierkegaard, who I believe was an 18th century Danish philosopher. And Søren Kierkegaard basically said there is a very distinct difference between the church of Christianity and the teachings of Christianity. That the church he calls Christendom, that's the political empire created around the beliefs of this person. And Kierkegaard said that has very little to do with the teachings of this person. And of course, this is a problem with institutions in general, that institutions, lose their oomph when they become more concerned with the power of the structure than with the teachings itself. That's another issue too. But the church's main concern, you won't find anywhere in Catholic, in church canon, that astrology is wrong. No, let me say that again. You won't find anywhere in church canon that astrology gives you incorrect information. It's wrong to practice it because it's of the devil. It's a distraction from the church. And interestingly enough, in the Talmud, which is the commentaries on the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, the Torah, they come to the same conclusion that the church does, worded slightly different. The church says you shouldn't do astrology because it's satanic. What that really means is you shouldn't do astrology because that means the church will lose absolute control. Of course, at the same time, they say it is done on earth as it is in heaven. That's another story too. The Jewish scholars in the Talmud said astrology actually works, just not for the Jews. Now, there is another theologian who comes into this picture, I believe in the late 1800s, maybe in the early 1900s. My dates here are not, I've not looked at this for a while, but his name was Paul Tillich, a Christian theologian. And Paul Tillich came up with the idea of what he called ultimate concern. And ultimate concern is when the mind is so focused on something that there is nothing else. And in a way, if you believe in something so strong, you can actually walk on fire, you can eat a poison, you can do things, and you'll be fine, because that's the power of ultimate concern. So that's the church side. It's a power issue. On the science side, it's kind of a power issue too. But you see, science is built on an underpinning philosophy that you isolate variables and you make a test, you make a hypothesis, you test it, and if it's true, you can keep testing it, and something that's scientifically true will always be true. The problem is that astrologically, no two moments are the same. And I have this wonderful book by a modern physicist who basically says, if scientists even entertained the idea that astrology was true, if we put any validity into it at all, we couldn't even practice science, because if I do an experiment at 2:30 on January 5th and do that same experiment at 5 a.m. on September 3rd and get different results, if time is a variable that I need to consider, then science doesn't work. Now, there are things like Newton's law of acceleration. Something does increase in speed at 32 feet per second. There are things in the middle world that seem to conform to these rules. However, there are other things that don't. And science, as it began to delve further into the realm of the microcosm and the macrocosm at both extremes, our understanding between the relationship as space and time of the three-dimensional world of Isaac Newton, and the fourth dimension of time, think of Einstein and the twins getting on, one of them getting on a rocket ship and coming back, and the other twin is now an old man, and the one traveling at the speed of light hasn't aged. That this whole understanding that we have of time in the Newtonian world was independent and consistent, and every second was a second, and that this second and that second had exactly the same length, and there was no quality. It was independent, and that's what Newtonian time was. And then Einstein says, "Oh, wait a minute. Time, it appears, is just gravitationally trapped space." What? All right. So this is another whole rabbit hole, but scientists, Deepak Chopra once said, and I wish I said this, but this comes from him. He once said that modern science suffers from the belief of the ancient superstition of materialism. Science is stuck because it believes in the ancient superstition of materialism. Science is like, you have to be able to see it for it to be real. If it only happens once, there's a lot of work been done statistically in astrology, but if every moment is unique and every person is born at a different moment in a different space, then you can't put astrology under the banner of science the way we once knew it. Now, of course, modern science and quantum theorists have basically blown apart a lot of the assumptions of cause and effect and time and the direction of time and all of this stuff. But that's why science is so dead set against it. The real problem is academically that astrology is like the kiss of death. And it may not be as bad. I subscribe to the largest online academic database, and the amount of work that's being done that's not being shouted astrology is amazing. And in fact, one of the largest nonprofit organizations of astrologers on the planet, which was founded around the same time that AFAN was, which oriented toward the legality issues. Another organization kind of went in the direction of educational certification. And that organization is called the National Council for Geocosmic Research. Note the absence of the word astrology. Very purposeful in that time, right, because geocosmic research is okay.
Well, it seems important to me to bring this history to light, to understand why the forces have felt so threatened. You know, what is it about astrology that has been so threatening, that so much energy has gone into blocking it for so long? And my question for you is, as I don't think most initiates into the realm of astrology even know that, like, as of now, really what you're saying, but 1986 seemed like a pretty huge turning point. What that no?
It was another turning point. It was a huge turning point, maybe if you lived in a certain area, but wow, but there were still I know of several court cases, Illinois, Ohio, Washington State, where people were basically fighting old blue laws that were taken off the books. No, it's definitely, and I don't know what case Judith was referring to. I mean, I know Judith well enough to know that she was referring to something specific, and I'm not doubting that. But and yes, of course, law is built upon precedent. So, you know, if it was the Azusa case that she was talking about, that was a California Supreme Court ruling, and that may have been it. But that doesn't necessarily have immediate impact on a town in Pennsylvania that has two laws on the books, one saying it's illegal to sing in the bathtub and the other saying it's illegal to practice fortune telling.
So what do you think is important for new people coming into the realm of astrology to know about this? And what's important for us to remember to, there's a level of acknowledging all the work and effort that people have put into allow us to do this right now. I mean, that to me seems really important.
It was like when I was a college student / hippie, smoking dope, smoking pot, marijuana. It wasn't that there was a reason not to do it. It was just a reason not to tell certain people. And I think that astrology still can be like that. I mean, even today, there are people who, and it's not just the Catholic Church, there are people that have real jobs that don't. I have a friend that comes to mind who had a fairly high up position in Portugal, in Lisbon, and didn't want his cohort to know that he did astrology. Actually, one of the people in my apprentice program works in the medical field and has been practicing and doing astrology for a long time, and kind of has talked about it to some of her acquaintances at work, and was mortified one day when her boss came to her. This is in a very traditional, straight medical institution, not academic, but like a clinic. And her boss came to her and said, I hear you do like astrology. And she goes, oh my God, it's over. I'm losing my job. He says, I wonder if you'd take a look at my chart. But the point is that there are places where it's not necessarily wise to say what you do unless you're cruising for a fight. Now, I'm a 4 planets in Aries with Gemini rising, and one of my favorite things to do, I mean, it's changed hugely. I can't even begin to tell you that in the 70s, saying astrology had a very different reaction than it does today. and there are several reasons for that. But I think the primary reason is the change in technology that allows anyone to have a birth chart, a natal chart, at just the click of a few buttons, online on a computer, and the ability for people who are looking at charts or interested or intrigued, talking to astrologers all over the world, regardless of a 12-year-old's academic parents know that they're interested in astrology. It's there, and it obviously is useful. And I'm sure it's obviously part of why astrology is in its own rebirthing renaissance, why Astrology Hub, is been consistently growing, why many astrologers are just, it's like we can't keep up with the demand because people are hungry for the information. But before the printing press, no one even had a book that could have the tables of where the planets were. So the astrology was a very different animal. And even up until, in the late 70s, early 80s, late 70s, really, people calculated charts by hand because there was no alternative. You got the books out, and in fact, learning how to delineate or read a chart started with having a table of houses, an atlas to look up latitudes and longitudes and time zones, having a time correction book, learning how to do interpolation and logarithms, and actually sitting down and calculating it all out from tables that you had. But our forebears didn't even have tables. They had to go out and do the observation and write down to where it was. So astrology has become available as a tool for anybody who is intelligent enough to read almost any language and to go online and to find a place where you can read about your sun sign, which is not about you individually, it's about you collectively, but it still has some validity. If you put 10 people in a room and 5 of them were from New York City and 5 of them were from Calcutta, I could tell you which ones were which and probably state some generalities and be right, but I wouldn't know anything about them individually. But still, people began to read and become more acquainted. And even people who don't know astrology and don't believe in astrology probably know their sun sign, if nothing else, and may not even know that their sun sign is just one fragment of a very complex array of things. Again, we get off track, but I think that part of the explosion and the need for laws to catch up with what people are doing, remember, it used to be illegal to, for a woman to smoke cigarettes in public or for a woman to have a bank account, or for, or for a woman or for a black person, to even, be sovereign of their own body. And of course, that's still an issue for many people now. It's very complicated, but astrology is just one more piece of this changing worldview that we're in that is showing us the ridiculousness of what the old laws are. However, at the same time, I used to have fun baiting people into discussions. Someone would say, I don't believe in astrology. And I would go, oh boy, I'm going to have some fun. One of the, and I did a lot of airplane travel. And one of my most memorable trips was sitting in a 3-seater on an airplane, sitting next to a nun. And I had a laptop and I was writing my column or doing charts. And I was, past hiding this stuff, but we had the most fascinating talk, and she was just so on board with mythology and astrology and got it. And but that same person, 50 years ago prior to that, might have been like asking to have her seat changed and taking out the garlic, and the Bible.
Yeah, we have
I've gotten that, and I get that on my YouTube channel. You probably do too. People are afraid of what they don't know, and they're afraid. And I would say equally, people coming from an uneducated science point of view, or people coming from an uneducated religious point of view, not knowing that both science and religion embrace astrology, regardless of what your boss, teacher, or priest or minister tells you. But I love the quote of Richard Feynman. You know who Richard Feynman was?
Mm-hmm.
Richard Feynman was a Nobel Prize winner physicist who, when he won, had an extraordinary life, just extraordinary. And when he was awarded the Nobel Prize, he was teaching at Caltech. And he got his renewal thing. He loved teaching, and he loved teaching at Caltech. And he got his renewal contract, and he read it, and he says, "Well, wait a minute. I'm only going to be teaching graduate students, and I always teach an incoming class of freshman non-science majors." And the administration said, "Oh yeah, well no, that's just the way it is. You're a Nobel Prize winner now. We can't, we have to have you up in the research area. We can't have you, down with undergraduate non-science majors." And Feynman says, "I love teaching here. I am telling you this right now. If you don't write into my contract that I will be guaranteed one section of incoming non-science major students every semester that I teach, if that's not written into my contract, I'll teach elsewhere. There are many places that would hire me." And they wrote that into his contract. He was an extraordinary person who was not a typical scientist. He was also the guy who figured out the Challenger disaster. That when the Challenger blew up, and they had that panel, he was on the panel because he's such a brilliant scientist and a brilliant thinker. And he kind of went to what he thought might be the weak link of the chain and brought up the thing about the O-rings, and he was immediately dismissed and said, "Nope, that can't be. And he went quiet. He came back the next day and he said, "I just need 3 minutes on the agenda, please," at the beginning. And he was granted that. And he took out the O-rings that were used on the plane, and he held one with a pair of tweezers, and he had a canister of liquid nitrogen that was as cold as the vacuum of space, and he poured the liquid nitrogen onto the O-ring, and he dropped it from about 3 inches onto the table, and it shattered into a million pieces. And he said, "That's all." However, and that was what had happened. The reason why I'm telling you this story is he's so cool. I could go on about Feynman forever. Feynman once said, "When a scientist," this is a direct quote, "when a scientist talks about non-scientific matters, he's just as stupid as the next guy." And that's my experience talking to scientists and astronomers who come in with this litany of things why astrology is superstition, it doesn't work, it's stupidity, there's been no experimental. And as soon as it's like, these are people who choose to remain ignorant, and that's their choice. You're not going to convert anyone. In fact, my newest tack on all of this is, I agree with you. Astrology is not scientific, it's magic.
Perfect.
If you can't lick them, join them.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for shedding light on how far we've come and helping us see where we're at today and all the things that have happened to get us today, to be able to sit here, to have this conversation every week, to be able to offer the opportunity for people to learn astrology. I love the story you told about Evangeline Adams.
I have one other quick story that I really would be remiss if I didn't tell you. And that was because of my involvement in Kepler College. When Kepler College was started, our goal was to create a 4-year liberal arts college where someone could get a major in astrology. Mm-hmm. That was the goal. And for it to be a fully accredited college of astrology, just like there's teaching colleges and there's Christian colleges and there's colleges that specialize in this and that and the other thing. The curriculum, the curriculum design, this whole thing was done with the unbelievable. There's a lot of people worked on this over the course of nearly a decade.
Yeah.
And Kepler College lost. Chris Brennan is a degree holder from Kepler College. He's one of the people who got in early, and he attended Kepler College. But what happened was that in order to get students, you had to be able to grant them loans. In order to be able to grant them loans, you had to be accredited, and the accrediting organizations would not touch, no matter what the academic excellence was, in a school that was teaching astrology as a study in liberal arts. They wanted it to be a craft school, a school to, turn out, craftsmen of, doing this particular trade. And so, I mean, I am an emeritus director on the board of directors, but I lost interest in it. It does cool stuff. They teach. A lot of people are still taking online courses through Kepler and through other schools, but the accreditation thing is just another form of illegality, is what I'm saying.
It's like the hands are tied at the money point. And what I love seeing is that instead of trying to get astrology into like the accreditation system, just the accreditation system is making itself irrelevant with time. I mean,
there are people who would say that of the AMA. I'm not always, but to some, realms of healing.
It's making itself irrelevant in time. And I only see it going more that direction. So we just need to keep doing what we know is valuable and useful and works for us and it helps humanity, and all that stuff just is going to fade in the back. They're making themselves irrelevant, and it's because out of necessity, we have to go in other directions.
So for many years, many astrologers, including myself, I mean, I feel like one of my failures in life, which I'll never be able to make right, is that as a 25-year-old, 28-year-old, when Cosmos came out, Carl Sagan's Cosmos, the series for PBS, my goal in life was to sit on a 1-hour debate on national TV with Carl Sagan about astrology. Now, incidentally, Carl Sagan was an absent member on that 186 scientists who signed that. And even though he bashed astrology and Cosmos, he would not put his name to it because he said, I can't do this. I've not studied it, which is the right answer.
Wow.
But
I'd also like you to see you debate that Bert Bach guy. Is he still alive?
No, I'd like my shot. I would like, I couldn't do Penn and Teller because that's rigged. You wouldn't, I mean, everything would be edited to make you look like an idiot because that's what they do. And they do it well. Yes. But Neil deGrasse Tyson to me is an embarrassment because he dismisses astrology out of hand without even knowing what it is. And it's my belief that if someone was truly interested in science and or in math, that in the matter of an hour, not necessarily broadcast, that I could have that person fascinated by the techniques and tools mathematically, the graphing techniques, the movement, the analysis, that would be an inroad for some of those people. But the quick story I want to tell you is there was a woman named Diana Stone, who's from Portland, who addressed NORWAC, that's the Northwest Astrology Conference, every year for many, many years. And this woman was a total far out as you can be mystic, astrologer, past lifer, brilliant, crazy, did it all, and then went further. And one of her talks, she basically said, for years, I've been trying to, convince people about astrology, and it was like, why are we trying to get into the mainstream? The mainstream's polluted, Yeah. So she said, my new way of looking at this goes back to the old, now very dated, and also the anti-racist in me does not, the image is only from a historical perspective where you have the cavalry single file coming through some deep canyon and the Indians on the top watching from the top. And she said, I consider myself as in one of those movies. And I want to be an Indian who's watching the cavalry come through that canyon. And I want to one at a time pick the last person off, just quietly, just the last person one at a time. until the general is riding through the canyon all by himself.
Hmm.
And that's where the conversion occurs. Do you understand that whole image?
That's where we're going. I mean,
that's why it's so important for
yes.
everyone who does astrology to interact with others on an intelligent basis, because it's that person being picked off who's last in most astrologers become
violence. We don't need violence to do this.
Oh, like, no, I don't mean, I mean metaphysically, totally. Right, oh, no, right. No, please.
Because picked up, I don't think that's what we're talking about.
No. Totally, metaphysically, reframing their mind.
The way we do that is we shine the light as bright as we can, and people are drawn to it. They're drawn, they want to come, they want to know, they want to see what it's all about. And it's holding that stance is the only thing that will ever work, and it's fun for us while we do it. So,
and most of the most brilliant astrologers I know got into astrology because they knew it was bullshit. And
I've heard that story so many times. I've heard that in so many interviews. I came in to prove that it was wrong, and I couldn't, and I could never walk away from it after that. So
that's not my story. I knew it was right even before I knew what it was.
Well, I hear that one too. I remembered it. It was like I knew it forever. Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, thank you so much. I am so grateful for this conversation, for this opportunity to share you have such a great handle and knowledge about the history, both like going back, but also recent history. And I know you've lived through a lot of it. The AFAN thing is so cool. I didn't even realize that was something that they were still actively doing and protecting.
Oh yeah, they just have a new board of directors. A new steering committee was just elected, which means there's a new legal chair taking over 2 years on that position. And you can go to afan.org and go down to legal. They have documents on what to do if you run into legal. I mean,
Yeah, that's amazing that there's people advocating, and they've been doing it for so long. They know how to do it. So it's amazing. Rick, thank you. And for those of you who want to take advantage of this freedom that we have to study astrology right now, make sure you join Level 2 Astrology Foundations starting tomorrow, astrologyhub.com/foundations2. We're going to be doing a deep dive, going deeper and wider into everything that we
not just a deep dive. It's going to be a roller coaster ride.
Ooh, gosh, even more fun.
Wow.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much, Rick. Thank you for being here every week. Oh, we're taking a break on the Cosmic Connection until March 25th. I'm really going to miss this. I mean, this is so much fun.
We'll still be online together.
We'll be online together. I know that. And we'll be with all of you students that are taking the course. For those of you who aren't taking, go back and check out some of the old episodes. We've had some incredible content. I'm sure there's 5 episodes that you've missed.
Do you know how many of them there are?
Oh my God, no.
Close to 40.
Wow. Every week since March, right? Or March or April? Did we start?
Last I saw there was 34.
Yeah.
But that was a while back, several weeks ago.
A lot of episodes. So if you missed some, you can catch up and go back and look at those. And we'll be back on Thursday, March 25th for all of you students. Super excited to dive in with you, and we'll see you.
Wait, one last thing. Happy new moon.
Yes, and happy new moon. It's today.
This is technically, the new moon isn't just the moment it happens. One of the things we'll talk about in the course will be the moon phases, and the phase of the new moon is the new moon plus 45 degrees, plus a sign and a half. So we are definitely in the new moon phase, which is also the Chinese New Year. So happy year of the metal ox.
Fantastic. Thank you, Rick. All right, everybody, take care. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for being a part of our community. And as always, thank you for making astrology a part of your life. We'll see you on the next episode.